and I'll hand it over to Miranda. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. I'm very grateful. So excited to be here this evening. Um, we have been closed to the public since the beginning of COVID because of restrictions. We are now open to the Salle University community. So we are having classes back on campus and in the museum, which is great. We are not open to the public just yet, but hopefully good things will come. So again, thank you everyone for coming. So I am excited to be able to share the collection with all of you. My name is Miranda Clark-Binder. I am the Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Salle University Art Museum. I have been there for about 14 years now. When I first started, I was on a grant from the Connolly Foundation to bring high school students to the Art Museum. And so that turned into middle school and elementary school and preschool and everything. And over the years, as that has changed and my role has expanded, I'm sort of in charge of everyone who wants to know something about the museum. So it's been really challenging for me to not be able to do that with COVID. So again, thank you to the library for inviting me this evening. What I'm going to do is give a little bit of background about the museum, show off some of our galleries, some of our highlights. As Nicole said, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and I will leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So this is our Renaissance gallery, but a little bit of information about the museum. I don't know how many of you have been to visit, but generally the response that I get from people is not very many people. We're working hard to change that. Our museum is founded in 1965 by Brother Daniel Burke. Brother Daniel was a president of the university and a provost and an English professor. And he founded the art collection with this idea that wouldn't it be fantastic for LaSalle students to have access to original works of art right on campus. So for about 10 years, he collected, and then we opened in 1975. We are located in the lower level of Hayman Hall, and we're all one level. So it's a nice kind of bite-sized art museum. Our mission is to be as encyclopedic as possible, representing all the major movements of art history. So as is the case when one studies traditional art history, that does tend to be a lot of European and American. We have our current director, our previous director. We've really made an effort to diversify the collection, collect artists from around the world, artists of color, female artists. And so those are definitely current goals for us to sort of really expand what our encyclopedic means. We have about 5,000 works of art. Now, that's a tricky number because 5,000 sounds like a lot, but most of them are works on paper. So 3,000 of them are these tiny little prints. And so because they're works on paper, we can't show them all the time because they're too fragile. So what you'll notice I've done today is for each gallery, I've tried to show one object that's on permanent view, and then one object that is kept in storage except for special exhibitions or for classes. We do private viewings for classes. Now, the nice thing is because the entire collection is online, so it is completely searchable, and it's at artcollection.lasalle.edu. And so that's, we're very lucky. Not many university art museums have that. We got a very generous grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences a few years ago to digitize the entire collection, which makes it so easy for our faculty and our community to search our collection. When we are open, we are free at all times for all visitors, which is great and an important part of our mission. Today I'm going to show, give you our Instagram and Facebook handle and our website, but I do hope that you'll consider coming to visit us when the world rights itself. So if you're familiar with our campus, this is, it used to be called Alney Hall, now it's called Hayman Hall. And this circular entrance is the closest one to the art museum, with our sign and our beautiful cherry tree, which blooms in the spring. I mentioned that the museum is all on one level, pretty much arranged chronologically in a series of period rooms. And so, like I said, what I've done is each room, I've put in a picture and then a painting and a work on paper that's part of the collection to sort of hopefully give a scope of the kind of objects that we have at LaSalle. So this is our Renaissance gallery, we call it, because most of the objects are from that time period. We do have a small 14th century painting in here and a large 17th century, but for the most part, 15th and 16th century. You may notice when you look at this picture, the architectural elements. So we are very grateful, very lucky to have some beautiful wood pieces from Widener home, the Widener family. Some of you may be familiar with Linwood Hall, which is in Elkins Park, which is currently no one is living there. The owner of that, his niece, Eleanor Widener Dixon, when she got married, there was a house built for her, and it was in the Tudor style. It was called Roneley. It was her name spelled backwards. And it was gifted to her as a wedding gift. It was designed by the architect Horace Trumbauer, who's the same architect who designed the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And they lived in the house from the 1920s to the 1950s. And then in the 1950s, she sold it to the Christian Brothers. And our university is run by Christian Brothers. And so it was almost a school for the younger brothers. They would go, it was called the Scholasticate, and they lived in the house from the 50s to the 70s. Then in the 70s, it was sold to developers. It was a lot to maintain and very expensive, and most of the brothers had moved to campus by that point. So the house was torn down, and there's now smaller houses there. But the story is, before they tore down the house, Brother Daniel, the founder of the museum, gathered together some students and a bunch of younger brothers, and they went and they salvaged wood pieces. So before the developers could tear them down. So we have some records, not very many, but we do think that the fireplace is England, probably 15th, 16th century. These doors that you kind of see here, those were the front doors to the house. And there's some other of this amazing woodwork sort of throughout the galleries, and I'll point that out too. But so the house was called Anselm House, and that's where the woodwork is from. Give you an idea of the kind of objects that we have. So in our Renaissance gallery, we have this lovely Sacred Conversation painting from the workshop of Lorenzo Costa. Now, the thing about virtual is it's hard to see the size, right? So if you can see here in this picture, it gives you an idea, like this is a bench and this painting is gigantic. So this is probably one of our most used paintings for classes, because it is this really great example of a sacred conversation. So a painting of Jesus and Mary in the same setting as a variety of saints. Here we have, starting on the left, we have Saint Bartholomew. Then next to him, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, as you can tell by her wheel. Then this saint here is probably, a bishop or a pope, one of the doctors of the church. We're actually, we've had some Renaissance scholars not entirely certain that identity, but we have some guesses. And then this here is Saint Sebastian. So this is a sort of lovely painting. We have a lot of religious art as a Catholic university. It's not really on purpose on our part. I think people like to donate religious art to us, and Brother Daniel probably did like to collect religious art. So there's a lot, but we do have other objects too, but lots of Madonna and Child in our Renaissance gallery. I mentioned wanting to choose a work on paper from each gallery. So we do have some really lovely Dürer prints, um, some really beautiful woodcuts, including this Adam and Eve by Dürer. So this, I mentioned it stays in storage because it's fragile. The exposure to light and temperature change is dangerous to it. But we do often pull it out for viewing for our students and our classes. And this is a really lovely, we have quite a few Dürer prints, which are really nice. I love this one. I think that's a cat at the bottom, which Nicole makes me think of your cat before we got started. Such nice details in these. And again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to sort of go through, but I'm happy to sort of come back and answer other questions as we go through. So our 17th century gallery, so most of our objects in here are from the 1600s. In general, the way this gallery is set up is one side, so the side with the still life here, has a lot of Dutch Protestant Reformation art. So created in Northern Europe after the Protestant Reformation, tends to be on that side. And then our French and Italian, our Catholic art, Counter-Reformation, tends to be on this other side, starting at this nun here. And so it makes a really interesting visual when you stand in this gallery to see these two competing thoughts happening in Northern Europe and Southern Europe, I mean, in Europe at the time, I should say. And then the wall that you can't see, the wall that's behind me, is Flemish artwork. The wood is from Anselm Hall, as is this chandelier. So there's this lovely German chandelier that you can sort of maybe see peeking out of the top there, that has been wired for electricity now. We have two really beautiful Dutch still life vanitas paintings. So still life was very popular in the 17th century in the Netherlands. Part of it was, again, this moving away from religious art, and also sort of putting other meaning into the paintings, right? So we call this vanitas painting. So this idea of sort of the vanity of life, how quickly it can change, how we should enjoy life, right? So these were some of the ideas that were being expressed through these what appear to be beautiful still life on the surface. And then as you get closer, you see the fruit starting to decay, and there's some bugs. And so we have two of these. Vanitas paintings are pretty common and are shown in a variety of ways. You might see the beautiful fruit and vegetable still life next to the dead hare, or the skull, or the candle that's just been snuffed out. Butterflies become symbolic of this too. So there's quite a few butterflies in sort of Dutch 17th century art. This is a very little painting, but it is a very lovely little one. We have lots and lots of prints from the 17th century, so it's kind of hard to pick. But this one is always a favorite with our college students. So I thought I would show it because it's so cool. So it's Aeneas in the Underworld from Scenes from Virgil. So you see this sort of monster here at the top, this hellmouth figure. And then as you look in, there's all of these multi-headed snakes and, moving figures, and just really cool visuals. So we had an exhibition that was a few years ago, making the comparison between, in some ways in Christian art and mythology and the sort of, underworld and Hades and hell and heaven and sort of drawing all of those parallels. And it was a very interesting exhibition. It's co-curated between our director and the chair of the art history department, who is a Baroque specialist. But the reason why I mentioned this in this print in particular, it was in the exhibition, but one of the public programs that we had was we have a philosophy professor whose specialty is theology and philosophy, but his interest is Harry Potter. And so he gave this really fascinating talk about the sort of cycles in Harry Potter of life and death and underworld, etc. And this was the image that he used to illustrate his talk. And as you can imagine, it was a very well-attended talk. lots of college students were interested to hear about how philosophy and Harry Potter and art history all went together. And I quite enjoyed it as well. Our 18th century gallery, so this is where we start to have American art. Our earliest American pieces are 18th century. We do have a small Benjamin West portrait, a Charles Willson Peale portrait. But so this is our 18th century. You might notice the blue tape on the floor in this picture. So we participate in something called the History Hunters Youth Reporter Program. It is a year-long social studies curriculum that was put together by Stenton Historical House. So Stenton was the home of James Logan. James Logan was the first secretary of William Penn. So Stenton gathered together historic homes in our sort of Germantown area and put together a year-long curriculum where students learn about the history of fourth graders, learn about the history of Philadelphia, of our area, through a series of field trips and on-site curriculum and in-classroom curriculum activities. They get a big workbook. This year it's all virtual, but normally it brings about 4,000 fourth graders to us. And so on our campus, they learn about Charles Willson Peale and early American art. But we put the blue tape on the floor because there get to be lots and lots of them doing activities in the galleries. And it's easier for the guides to remind people not to go on the other side of the tape. So in addition to, I mentioned, we started having American art. We do also have this really lovely studio of Tiepolo painting, Christ and the Woman Taken into Adultery, which is a New Testament story. And that's where the idea of, let he who be without sin cast the first stone, that's where that comes from. And so this really beautiful studio of Tiepolo. Now, interestingly, as you go through the records of our museum, one finds that as Brother Daniel acquired these paintings in the 60s or the 70s, they were believed to be by the master. So this was originally attributed to Tiepolo. Over the years, through various scholarship and, as the pieces are on the internet and scholars contact us and find out more, many of our pieces have been deattributed. So Studio of Tiepolo or Studio of Lorenzo Costa, which for our sake is still okay because we are a teaching collection. And so it still allows us to sort of make the points that we're looking to make about our paintings, even if they aren't by the old master. This is a really fantastic. So Henrietta Johnson is like the first female artist recorded in the colonies of America. And so this is 1710. This is a pastel on paper, which is, so this pastel drawing is over 300 years old. And she is so lovely. It's just very delicately done. Um, we do bring her out for classes, but she actually, so she's particularly fragile, um, but really, really lovely and um, super excited and happy to have this very early female artist in our collection. We don't know who is a portrait of. That has not lasted, that information. Our 19th century gallery, um, I know I shouldn't have a favorite, but after 14 years, probably my favorite. It has a very comfy sofa, as you can see, and a very plush carpet. It is a favorite of our visitors too, um, especially high school students who like to, excuse me, camp out on the rug and look at the art. Um, Probably the most significant, if you will, for whatever that means, painting in our collection. So this is a Henry Ossawa Tanner painting of Mary. So Henry O. Tanner was a fantastic, fantastic, amazingly talented, phenomenal artist. He was the first African-American student ever admitted to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So PAFA is the oldest art school in the country. It's here in Philadelphia. He was admitted, he studied under Thomas Eakins, and became this fabulous artist. He left Philadelphia and started a studio in Paris, spent most of his life in Paris. And when he sold his first painting back to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, actually, the Annunciation, which you may be familiar with, it's a very young Mary with a very orange light. But when he sold that back to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, he became the first internationally recognized African-American artist. And so this was painted around the same time as the Annunciation. This was actually painted in 1898. This was his entry to the 1900 Paris Salon exhibition. So unfortunately, what you can't tell here, but I think you can tell here. Yes. So this is the original frame designed by Tanner. There are pictures of it in his studio on an easel in this frame. And attached to the frame, you might be able to see the little papers here. These little papers are the original paper tags assigned to it in the Paris Salon for 1900. So this painting traveled with a Henry Ossawa Tanner exhibition put together through PAFA, and the painting traveled for about a year and a half around the country. But the frame actually stayed with us because the frame is more fragile than the painting, and the tags, which have been affixed to the frame for over 100 years, could not be removed, and we didn't want to lose them. So they stayed with us. It's a really fascinating painting because if you're familiar with Tanner, biblical subjects are something that he often paints. His father was a preacher with the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He was supposed to become a preacher. That was his father's plan. So these biblical stories are really important to him. He has a benefactor that sends him through the Holy Lands to travel, to really see how people live. So they have a sense of authenticity to his work. Usually his biblical paintings are really specific scenes from the Bible. They are a moment you can find the passage in the Bible that he's painting. This is not that. And so it has caused scholars lots of information, different theories about what this painting could be. Some have said rest on the flight into Egypt. Others have said, no, that's not possibly true. A variety of things. The theory that we accept as put forth by Brother Daniel and published in the Henry Ossawa Tanner catalog that the Philadelphia Museum of Art put out years ago is that this is Mary as the mother, and the foreshadowing of Jesus's later death. So here in front of her on the ground, you may notice the blankets. And if we were a college class, then we would do this through inquiry based, and I would ask you what you saw. But for the sake of time and energy, I'm just going to tell you. Here, under the blankets is what we perceive to be a baby. The figure, appears dead. The face is covered. There is a halo. And so the sort of generally accepted is there's this moment of foreshadowing of his later death, which is an interesting and different concept for Tanner. And so very, very interesting, very meaningful to our community. Our Christian brothers, our Lasallian brothers are, feel strongly about this painting. So she's one of our loveliest. And as you can see from here, she really sort of commands the room and holds a very nice spot right there in the middle of the wall. I realize as I'm giving this talk that a lot of the works on paper, I chose female artists. That's just my own bias, I think. But one female artist that we have represented quite extensively in our collection is Violet Oakley. So Violet Oakley was Philadelphia-based, pretty much. She was a muralist, and so she did murals. If any of you have been to Woodmere, there was an exhibition of her work. So she did, mural at Springside, Chestnut Hill, in the library. She did the Harrisburg State Capitol murals. So she's actually like one of the first, if not the first female in America to do this large scale mural. She also did these murals at First Presbyterian Church in Germantown, which is near us. So when she passed away and her art was distributed, our art museum was given 100 of her sketches for the murals at First Presbyterian. So we have 100 of these sketches in various stages. Some are really lightly chalk drawings. Some are more finalized versions that look more like the murals in the church. And it's the great women of the Bible. So it's a really very interesting cycle. And again, if you are very interested in her or these murals, and you go to our website and just type in Oakley, you get really a ton, and they're just so beautiful. I particularly like this one because you can see the grid. So you can see a little bit of her process, in addition to her really beautiful handling. I love this picture here. Her handling of the paint. She's a really beautiful and phenomenal painter. And if you've gotten a chance to see the murals at the state capitol, and that's a whole story, right? She wasn't supposed to get to paint them, but the man who was supposed to paint them couldn't. And so it's quite a story, but she's really phenomenal. And so, and spent much of her later life in Chestnut Hill. And so that's why there's quite a few of her murals and stuff in our area around us here in Philadelphia. So in addition to our permanent galleries, we have a special exhibition space. This, which usually changes, we often have 2 every academic year. This one we've actually kept up because it's been really useful to our professors and our community, and also because the artwork can stand the exposure to the light and to the elements. So this has actually been extended through the end of this academic year, and it was up last academic year too. So because of COVID, this one gets to be up for 2 years. This is a really interesting exhibition. So we have a lot of African art, traditional African sculpture in our collection. And this was an exhibition seminar. So our director, who is an art historian who happens to know quite a bit and has taught many classes on African art, taught an art history class where students, undergrads at LaSalle, learned how to curate the exhibition. So it was an interesting, because not only did they learn the history of each of these objects, and the history of the ethnic group and the history of the country and the continent, they also learned about the history of exhibiting African art, which is controversial and complicated and has changed over time. So they learned about exhibitions as social constructs, and the different ways that we talk about African art now versus how they did in the past. So it was a really interesting. So not only did they learn about the objects, but also the history of exhibition. And then what they did was each student sort of chose their ethnic group and their object. So this exhibition isn't necessarily representative of, not trying to be encyclopedic, was the preferences of the students in the class, and then they did all the research and they wrote all the labels, and they did a really, really fantastic job. This was it's a great exhibition, and the students really took a lot of pride in learning to put it together, which is cool. This is another wall in the exhibition to give you an idea. So this beautiful mask here all the way on the left is a Kuba mask, with the horn coming out, and it's with very beaded and very intricate patterning. It's very, very cool. Then over here on the right, these pieces are both female masks. They're chakwe masks, which are very cool. And so again, a student, for example, chose chakwe, chose these two masks, did all of the research on the individual masks and also on the culture to write the labels, which is very cool. Our modern and contemporary space. So our modern and contemporary space is actually two separate galleries and a hallway in the middle. So if you can, it's hard to get the sense of space here, but so in general, this side of the hallway is 1900 to 1950, give or take. And then this is 1950 to sort of more present, more contemporary. And then the hallway down the middle between these two galleries is Pennsylvania artists. To give you an idea of the sort of art represented in our modern and contemporary, so we do have some early pieces by Alma Thomas. Alma Thomas was a very important female African-American artist, fascinating woman who, graduated from Howard. She was the first woman to graduate with an art history degree from Howard, like all sorts of really amazing things. And then she became an art teacher. And so she was an art teacher most of her life. So she becomes the first African-American woman to have a retrospective at the Whitney, a solo woman show, when she's 72, 79, something like that. So she's in her 70s. If you're familiar with Alma Thomas, though, you're probably thinking of her abstract, very colorful paintings. So those are the paintings she sort of becomes known for. We have a few that are these earlier pieces with still life. We also have some figure studies. So we assume that they might be more sort of student art of her own before she sort of finds her very colorful abstract paintings later on. In the more contemporary realm, so for the past few years, in an effort to sort of beef up our collection in certain contemporary ways, we've had exhibitions. So we had an exhibition a few years ago that was extremely popular called Border Crossings, Immigration and Contemporary Prints. And so it allowed us to collect relatively inexpensively some really beautiful fine art prints. So these were all created by the Curator project. The Curator project is a fine art print collaborative in Texas that the original mission of it was to sort of promote Latinx artists and give underserved artists access to professional tools and to make these beautiful prints. and that mission has continued, and they've worked with museums. And so these are 3 of them that we were able to get for that particular exhibition from Serie. So they are all contemporary Latinx artists. I think they might all be men. But this one on the right happens to be one of my very favorites, this painting here. So this is kind of a memorial to the women of Juarez, Mexico. The artist lost a friend. He was friends with the female artist who was murdered in Juarez. I want to say, was it in the 90s or the early 2000s when Juarez was in the news quite a bit? And so he made this, and it's a really beautiful, there's the sort of Madonna, Virgin Mary figure, but then there's this sort of sugar skull, but then there's these Aztec or Mayan, I don't pretend that I quite know exactly, but all of these together just make this really visually stunning print. So this is called Flowers for Juarez. And I included these as just an example of the sort of variety of contemporary art that we have. So, much of our contemporary art, again, are works on paper in our collection. So that was my spiel. To find out more about our art museum, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I do try to post most days, Monday to Thursday. Our handle is at Salle University Art Museum for both Facebook and Instagram. That is our website. We're located on the lower level of Heyman Hall. And if you have, we're going to open the floor up to questions, but if you have any other questions that you prefer, you are welcome to email me, and that is my email address, clarkbinder@lasalle.edu. Nicole?
Well, thank you so much for that. We currently don't have any questions in the chat, but you can go ahead and enter them there if you want to, or you can unmute yourself. So while people are thinking about that, my question for you is, what's your favorite period of art?
Oh, my favorite period of art. So that's a tough one because I like them all. My specialty and my research are French artists who study in Rome. So specifically sort of 17th to 19th century. I have a real soft spot for Ingres and David, these very sort of neoclassical French 19th century painters. But then more lately, I think possibly because it's been so popular with our students, and we've had quite a few talks about it, this sort of idea of activist art, so contemporary artists who, looking to sort of make a difference through their art. So I mentioned the Serie project prints. We also have quite a lot of prints by organization called Just Seeds, which is here in Pittsburgh, but it's international artists creating these fine art prints, but then the prints are often used to raise awareness about a topic or, raise money for a topic. So lately I'm really interested in that sort of idea.
Thank you. All right, so the first question from Betty. In the earlier artwork, you mentioned that the butterfly stood for something. What was that?
So in these Vanitas paintings, so they're often exploring this idea of, well, there she is, of life and death, the movement from life to death, or the transformation. And so I mentioned sometimes it will be a very dead animal and then very luscious fruit, or a candle that's just been snuffed out, but you can still see the smoke. So that butterfly becomes that sort of that same idea of transformation, right? It sort of cocoons and then almost dies and then comes back as something even more beautiful.
Thank you. All right, so the next question is from Lois. How do you acquire your art? Is it mostly local donations or do you solicit art from other sources?
That is a complicated question, but no. Early on, the sort of beginning of the collection was definitely Brother Daniel was super good at making friends and making friends with collectors, and raising money and purchasing art. There's a story that he went to Sotheby's during a snowstorm. This was like in the 60s, right? So there was no like internet bidding or anything. And he went with a very limited amount of money and was able to like scuff up things because he was there and had money. That is not the case anymore. And so most of our objects are now donated to us. What we find is that collectors like to share their work with us. We don't have much. We don't have much in storage, even though it sounds like we do, but as far as paintings or sculptures, we really don't. And so very often if a collector has something to share, there's a good chance that we'll put it out and share it with students. And so thankfully, we've gotten very lucky that collectors like the idea of college students and pre-K to 12 students. So I should mention that we have about, in an average year when the world is not upside down, we have about 10,000 visitors a year, and about 5,000 of those are school kids. And then the other 5,000 are mostly our university community. But so the answer to that is usually donations, but every once in a while, sometimes we do have some endowment funds for some works on paper. So sometimes we can buy things, but not too much in the current climate.
You kind of touched on this before, and this question is from Stan and Marianne. Do you have a few favorite works in the collection that you haven't mentioned in this presentation?
That is a good question. So I do. We have, there is a painting that I actually didn't, I didn't include in this, and I should have. Probably one of my very favorites is a painting called The Dancer by Charles Searles. And he was a modern African-American Philadelphia, Germantown-based artist. And it is this phenomenally huge painting. She is maybe 8 feet tall, of an African dancer. And it is an absolutely fabulous painting. And actually, if anyone does want desperately to see this painting I'm talking about, when you get a chance, if you like the Art Museum on Facebook, I posted her the other day. And so she is really lovely. And then the other part of that story is she was a partial gift from Barbara Bullock, who is a contemporary African-American artist in Germantown. She was friends with Charles Searles. And she was selling the artwork, and we didn't have as much money as other places like the African American Museum, but we promised we would put it out and that lots of people would see it and she could come and visit whenever she wants. And so it was a partial gift from her. And so it's this really lovely, it's a beautiful painting with a super fun story, and also connected to this really amazing, lovely local artist as well. So it's probably The Dancer by Charles Searles is one of my favorites I didn't mention.
Right, and so Kate says the paintings are bright in color. Have many been restored?
So we have gotten very lucky with conservation grants over the years. And we do have some, again, if you're very interested, on our website, the paintings that have been conserved have before and after pictures, which is very cool. So there are some foundations in Philadelphia that will give money, because restoration is extremely expensive. But thankfully, foundations do donate for that. So we have had some that have been restored, and we do have more that need restoration, but it's definitely an expensively ongoing process.
Another question from Stan and Mary Ann. How do you care for the very old wood shown in the first room?
So there's some, We are on a separate HVAC system from the rest of the building. So I mentioned we're on the lower level of an academic building, but so our pretty much the main way that we do it is by monitoring the temperature and humidity controls really carefully. And so we have an advanced system, and if it fluctuates more than a certain percentage, alarm bells go off to facilities and people rush down and adjust things. That's pretty much our best way. We have had, little mini crises. We had a little tiny wooden painting from the 1300s that had, you can't see it now, it's tucked over here in the corner, had a little insect infestation that we weren't not sure for how long, probably before it came to us. The conservator said it had to be sent away to New York for sort of X-ray technology to kill the things. They told me I couldn't spray bug spray on the 700-year-old painting. But we do have, we also have a close conservator friend who sort of will come through and check things for us on occasion, and etc. So we sort of keep on top of our conservation efforts. But the biggest help is the HVAC system.
I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to come back to your question, Denise, but I'm going to, because we're at this photo right now, it's what are the figures on the fireplace surround?
So they are, so these figures up here, so these are on the left, it's a male and a female. On the right, it's a male and a female as well. They are not identifiable. They're the sort of caryatid figures. So this idea of they're supposed to be like columns, but they are figures. Here, what's really interesting though is here on the doors, there are each one of these little shields. They are different jobs, if that makes sense. So, and these doors are super heavy. We have to open and close them every day. According to the fire marshal, the doors have to be closed and they're very, very heavy, and very weathered. And I do let kids touch these doors because I figure that they were the front doors of a house. But here they are different jobs, different symbols, like heraldic symbols for trades, probably 16th century.
Going back to Denise's question, does the online museum have links for the research on the pieces?
Yes. So for the most part, if for example, the Tanner, if you looked up the Tanner, it will give you the gallery label. So what it specifically, it says in the on the label, sometimes it has the references. Quite a few people have written doctoral dissertations on the Tanner. Those resources are not digitized, but they are in our files. And so if someone needed to do more research than is available, that could be facilitated. But for the most part, if you look at the objects, it has all the gallery labels and it has any conservation information as well as part of our sort of grant proposals and grant reporting and before and after pictures. So for example, I'm just going to show you really quick, since I'm still sharing my screen, right? Let me do it. Okay, never mind. But there's some of our paintings, you can see the before and after pictures, and they're really dramatic. Conservation.
When I send out the link for the recording, I'll make sure I include a link to the online gallery so people can explore that as well.
And also each of these objects, this is the link to this particular object. So you could look it up by the author, or sorry, the artist, or the title, or this, object number as well. But each one of those objects, that's the link.
Thank you. All right. If we don't have any more questions, I think I'll let you go. I just want to thank you for sharing some of your knowledge with us. I found it was very interesting, and how much You mentioned some artists I've never heard of before, but when you mentioned the places, I've been there, so I know I've seen their work, and I just didn't know the background of it. So that was really interesting for me. So I want to thank everyone for coming and the great questions we had in the chat box. And thank you, Miranda, for spending this evening with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Nicole. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I do hope, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Take a look at our website, and please do consider coming to see us when the world has righted itself. We'll still be there.
All right, so I'm going to stop the recording and farewell, everyone.